Growing up in Deal in the 1950s, 1960s and 70s saw me having many adventures. In this episode I'm going to try and give you an insight to a few true accounts of happenings at sea in a small boat, in conditions when I look back now were at times not safe to be afloat in, but money had to be earned so fish had to be caught, and weather conditions when one's a youngster never entered our heads. We went afloat and earned a living. Pictures again are scarce of my times afloat, so I've placed many pictures of Deal in this film. I hope you enjoy the true stories. A cool calm day in July in the 1960s saw myself and Dave Trice longlining for spur dogs out near the Lurry Victory, a wreck which lies on the South Goodwin banks and is surrounded by two other large wrecks, the Aegon and the Ira. We had baited in 20 long lines and set to sea, arriving at our destination on the edge of the banks after 40 minutes steaming. The sea was calm and not another boat in sight. The lines were shot to the northeast and went from deep water up onto the edge of the banks. Here they would stay now over the high tide until slack water. We steamed out a bit further and anchored just outside the Lurry Victory to do some rod and line fishing for 4 or 5 hours until we were ready to haul the lines. Reaching our destination, the masts of the wrecks were still all visible, and we anchored some 200 yards southeast of the Lurry Victory. Fishing was excellent, with good sized spur dogs and some very nice sized bass coming aboard. The sun was shining bright and the day was excellent. As the tide started to fall, we were still bringing plenty of fish aboard, so we decided to leave the lines for longer than usual. It was now 4 hours after high water, and not really taking any notice of our position, we suddenly realised we were getting short of water under our keel, and around us as parts of the banks had started to show. We put our rods away and weighed the anchor. The engine started, we slowly made headway towards deep water. A sudden crunch came from under our keel. We'd run aground. Backing off, we headed south. Again we grounded. Once more we tried to head east, but too much of the sands were now uncovered. We were stuck in a pool of water where banks started to show all around us and no way out. The minutes passed like days. With less than 6 feet of water under our keel and no way to escape until the tide turned, we were just thankful it was a calm day. The wrecks were showing well and large sections were within 50 yards of us. Here we sat praying the weather would stay calm until we had enough water to be able to float out to deep water again. It was nearly 2 hours later when the tide started to come in and a slight breeze from the southeast started to blow. At last, cautiously, we slowly steamed southwest back over the sands, hitting the bottom on several occasions, and picked up the outside down of our long lines. These had been in the water now for 2 tides, and our expectations of there still being fish on them was not good. Hauling the lines, we were confronted with a sight most fishermen would love to see. Spur dog after spur dog came aboard with the odd skate. Lines hauled, we turned our head for home. By now the wind had veered to the southwest and was freshening hard. A 1 hour journey and we arrived back at the beach plot at the top of King Street, hove up and sold the catch. Over 80 stoner spurs and 9 stoner skate, along with 23 good-sized bass. 2 hours after getting ashore, a full gale from the southwest was blowing. This fishing trip was a very narrow escape and could have turned into a disaster, but, being young, it didn't deter us, and many other times saw me grounded on the Goodwin sands. Another day in December in the 1960s saw us once again longlining from the fairway, which was stationed opposite the Time Ball Tower. It was a calm winter's day and conditions were ideal. Quite a bit of cod had been caught inshore, so we baited our lines in and shot them at 9 AM, starting from Tugboat Stream, that's just outside the pier head, and steaming in a northeast direction and finishing at the Bankboy Stream. Returning ashore, we made ready for launching at around 2 PM, and then proceeded to the Star and Garter Inn for a few beers. Time passed and at 1:30 PM we decided to go and get ready to launch, but we were greeted with a terrible scene. The wind had freshened up hard from the east and the temperature had dropped rapidly with snow flurries. Rounding up on the plot, we assessed the situation. There was really heavy swell from the east running and it was bitter cold. No hope of getting afloat to retrieve the lines. Joey Smith and several other boatmen joined us, and after some consideration we decided to launch. Foolish or not, I don't know, but in those days we had no fear. The fairway was made ready, slip chain was on and the engine running. Lower woods were being held by other boatmen. The swells were huge and consistent. We sat and waited for a calm in the swells so we could effect a good launch, but none were coming, when all of a sudden Joey Smith shouted, "Let go!" The fairway rapidly made way across the greasy woods and hit the surf. The engine was put full astern when suddenly a huge swell hit us and knocked us broadside, but we were still pulling astern. Soaked to the skin, we pulled clear of the surf. I put the rudder on and turned the boat's head to the east. Broken seas were hitting our bow and the spray was rising high into the air, freezing to the wheelhouse and mast on contact. We slowly made our way to the outer end of the lines. It was bitter cold and ice was forming on the length of the boat. Dave Trice, my crew, was chopping it off with a spanner. Reaching the lines, we started a haul. The first half a dozen hooks were empty, then in came a cod, then another and another. Every 3 to 4 hooks held a good-sized cod. The wind by now had reached to a full gale from the east with freezing rain and we were frozen to death. Lines hauled and the tide lower on the beach, we made way for home and the beach plot. Several boatmen had got the woods ready and wire down ready for us coming ashore. That was one relief. Running hard on top of a huge swell, we hit the shore, coming almost the boat length out of the water. Thank goodness for that. All hove up and the helpers, having taken fish of their choice, we gutted up and the fish merchant came and picked up our catch. Cod at 10pence a stone and whiting at 6pence a stone in old money, we made a total of £6, 3 shillings and 2pence, a good day's work. But the likes of the cold and wind coming in that fast without warning I never ever saw again. 1970 saw me buy the fishing boat Spray. She was used solely for commercial fishing, longlining, trammelling for huss and trawling. She originally had a Kelvin Ricardo petrol paraffin engine installed in her, which on several occasions saw us in trouble. We had on one occasion shot long lines off Walmer Castle. The wind was blowing a full gale from the southwest and a heavy sea was running. Launching to retrieve the lines in the afternoon of an October day, we endeavoured about our task. Reaching the lines, we started to haul them with a nice run of cod showing. Then suddenly the prop shaft sheared. We continued to haul the lines. Having lost engine power, we attempted to row home. This was fruitless with the strong southwest wind, and now the tide against us. We were now left with no choice but to fire a flare-up. There were no radios on board in those days. Around 15 minutes and we could see the Walmer lifeboat getting ready to launch. How humiliating, but we had no choice. Then we saw a boat approaching. It was Joey Smith in the Jill. He took our line and towed us home, and gratitude was given for his service, and thanks for the lifeboat which was on standby. A new Petter diesel engine was installed in the Spray after this incident, which increased her pulling power. This enabled us to tow a 6-fathom trawl with 10-fathom sweeps effortlessly. Trammel netting for huss in February, March and April saw us spending most of our time on the West Goodwin banks. We found this spot in 1971 and it was very prolific, but the fish only seemed to be there on an easterly wind and strong tides. Huss was a major earner and sold well. Most were skinned and prepared and sold from the beach, and we had a good demand for it. It was not uncommon for us to bounce the bottom on the West Goodwin when we were hauling one of the several fleets that we had shot across them. But early one morning, in March 1976, we were hauling at almost dead low water with a strong northeast wind blowing and a slight sea running over the banks. Halfway through hauling the second fleet of nets, we came up hard and fast on a piece of wreckage near the Piave and were pinned tight to the ground. We secured the net and tried to tow off the fastening, but we couldn't shift it. Almost half an hour later the keel of the Spray started bouncing on the sandy bottom, so we paid away from the fastening. Then suddenly we grounded and stuck fast. The tide was still falling, and in no time we were high and dry on the West Goodwin bank. The banks used to dry quite often in times past. Dick got out to the Spray and walked over to where the net was fast and said it was stuck on a piece of iron that looked like a propeller from a plane, but no other wreckage was visible above the sand. The sea was only about 2 foot deep there now. He cleared the net and we pulled the rest of it aboard the Spray, clearing the huss and getting it ready for shooting again. It was over half an hour before the tide rose enough to float us off. Heavy swell started running over the banks and the wind was freshening fast. It was worrying, as we could have been dashed to pieces, but we made it. We floated off with no damage. The trammel was shot back in the sea near the West Goodwin buoy, and we continued to haul and clear the other 3 fleets we had out there. Job done, we came ashore, deep in the water with 145 score of huss. Some were sent to Folkestone Market, but the bulk of them were skinned and sold on the beach. Many times we fell foul of this wreck or fastening on the West Goodwin banks, but all it did was tear up the nets a bit, whereas when we caught the Piave, which was near to there, it did a lot of damage and hours were spent mending. Another instance was on a calm summer night in June. We were trawling for sole and turbot. I'm not saying where we were, although I still have the bearings for the wreck in my head. We towed for 1 hour and hauled with some really nice large Dover sole and 1 turbot of around 20 pound coming aboard, and a good variety of mixed flatfish. Another haul on the same tow saw very little fish, so I decided to haul off out to sea a bit further. We'd been towing for around half an hour when we suddenly came up fast on the bottom. Again it was low water and not very deep where we were. Knocking the engine out of gear, we started hauling the trawl. This was all done by hand as we never had a winch. Heaving the gear up tight, we struggled to get the aft door aboard. Then the forward door came up and was secured, but to our surprise, hanging from the sweep near the trawl door was a long object of about 4 feet. It was discovered to be a bomb. This was hanging on the sweep chain, pointing downwards. Instantly we tied a rope round its tail and made it secure. The after end of the trawl was still hung up on the seabed, so struggling we slowly managed to raise the ground rope to the surface, only to be confronted by a large ingot which looked like lead. This weighed in at 300 weight when we got it ashore. It was very similar to the silver lead ingots we retrieved off a wreck near the Guildford Hotel a few years previous. We put the tackle on this ingot and got it aboard, then hauled the rest of the net in. Now we had the problem of the unexploded bomb. So with the engine engaged ahead, I started steaming at half speed. Dick cut the rope that was holding the bomb fast, and we held our breath as, being in shallow water, we had no chance if it exploded when it hit the bottom. Luck was on our side. It never went off and is still there to this day. The following day we took a diver friend out to the wreck, and on diving it he confirmed there were 3 huge stacks of what looked like silver lead ingots, all of around 200 to 300 weight in weight and about 4 feet long, identical to the ones we salved off the other wreck we found in Sandwich Bay some years previously. Experience told me that not getting paid for the last lot of ingots we salvaged, I was not prepared to salve this cargo. It could stay where it was. My diver friend never knew where the wreck was, as I took him out on a misty day when the shore marks were not visible. I found the wreck easy enough by compass and time distance though, and Dick Smith, who was my crew, never told anybody either. He's past the bar now, bless him, so the secret has gone with him. That was in 1974, and to this day the silver lead ingots are still at the bottom of the sea. That's a couple of true stories from my fishing days past. I have many more which I will put to film. Hope you enjoyed them.